Chapter 3. The limo pulled up to the main entrance of the largest casino in Kansas City. It was still morning, and a weekday, so I didn't expect to see a crowd, but when we stepped inside, it was even more deserted than it should have been. There were a few people here and there, but they weren't strictly people. If I looked closely, the old ladies at the slots were little more than bits of ash. That's why they were all smoking. It hit me then that there was a reason why the city ordinance against smoking in public areas didn't apply to casinos. We passed the ash ladies and took a private elevator to the executive offices. A beautiful succubus, complete with cliché red skin, horns, and tail, was sitting at a desk at the entryway, answering the phone and transferring calls to their intended recipients. She nodded and smiled at us as Leopold led me through the offices into a large conference room. A small buffet had been set up on a table in the back of the room. I ignored the rest of the meeting's attendees and headed in its direction. No need to start an uncomfortable meeting on an empty stomach. Hell never scrimps on rich foods. Gluttony is one of the 7 deadly sins, after all. I filled my plate with eggs Benedict and potatoes before turning around to face my hosts. 3 of them were seated in high-backed leather chairs, lit cigarettes in their hands, staring at me. All in business suits. Well, all except for the shapeless mass of flesh in the high-end hover-round. That was the department head of sloth and gluttony. Looking at it, because nobody knew exactly what S&G was, made me momentarily question my gusto at the buffet. But only momentarily. If I was going to sit through this meeting, I was going to enjoy something, and that something was going to be hollandaise-covered eggs and fried potatoes, and probably some pastries. I smiled at the group, put my plate down in front of the empty chair, and then went back to the buffet, grabbing a coffee mug and the full carafe of coffee, which I plunked down next to my plate. I slid into the chair and started shoveling eggs into my face. Nina began the meeting with her complaints. She headed up lust and envy, and she looked it. She wore her signature color, red, and her lips were painted to match. Her suit hugged every surgically enhanced curve, and her blonde hair was perfectly coiffed. She was a living Barbie doll, designed to incite lust and jealousy in human beings. She ruled her employees, human and demonic, with complete control. She was always in control, while the sin she ruled over caused humans to lose control. She was a bitch. "We have a problem, Judge. It's been a long time since we've had any reason to file a formal complaint. Several decades, at least," she said. Her cleavage was threatening to pop the buttons on top of her suit. I kept eating my brunch and nodded, since she was expecting some sort of acknowledgement from me. She was right. The last time they had filed a complaint was the 1980s with the PMRC. That situation was easily handled through arbitration. All it took was explicit lyrics warning labels that only made albums more tempting to impressionable teens while still labeling them as morally lacking, which is all the other side wanted in the end. Since then, it had been petty squabbles over individual possession cases and poltergeists, but nothing that required an actual formal complaint. "Surely you have seen the recent changes in the city, Judge," Nina continued. "The billboards advertising the new church," she spat the word, "and the new holy man, Jeremiah Anderson. We feel there is undue influence from the angelic realm involved. He has somehow managed, after years of failure, to take his flock from 5 souls to 50,000, with an aggregate influence of over 500,000 annually on the low end. Profits are down. We are concerned. Our bosses are concerned. Daimon level. We need answers, Judge. And now." Ira stood up. A short, squat, older, white male. His face was red and his eyes bulged a little. He was Wrath and Pride's representative. "While my division has suffered much less loss than the others, we are concerned about future ramifications." "Shut up, you little cunt! I have the floor!" hissed Nina. "I will not shut up, hussy!" His face turned even redder and grew to the point where he towered over her. I looked down at my plate. It was empty, so I turned to my coffee. It was perfect. I watched as Ira raised his fist to Nina, who sat her unnaturally round bottom back in her chair and pouted. And I got up to get some more pastries. Hell's middle management would make an incredibly entertaining reality show, which made sense. After all, they were mostly responsible for the demise of MTV and the rise of reality television. "If you are ready now, Crow," asked Ira as I sat back down in my chair. He was still growing in his rage, and he was threatening to fill the far end of the room now. "Of course, please continue," I said, my mouth full of a croissant that had appeared to be filled with fig preserves and goat cheese. "The main problem, beyond gross mismanagement in other departments," he pointedly stared at Nina, "is that somehow the nature of humans in the metro is fundamentally changing. I have made a PowerPoint presentation to illustrate the problem." Oh, for fuck's sake, I thought to myself. At least the pastries were good. I looked across the table, and Leo was rolling his eyes as Ira lowered the lights and began his presentation. "We all love your PowerPoint presentations, Ira," said Leo, his voice dripping in sarcasm. Nina reapplied her lipstick. S&G, who had remained silent through the entire meeting up to this point, began to snore loudly. Ira slammed his fist into the conference table right next to the sleeping mass of flesh splintering the polished surface. S&G snorted, exhaling sparks in the dim light. "Come on, Ira," said Leo. "Now I'm going to have to order a new table. S&G isn't going to add anything to this conversation anyway. Let's get on with it. I have work to do." "Fine," said Ira, and shrank down to a reasonable height of 6.5 feet. He started his first slide. "This is humanity's baseline in the district, the agreed-upon status quo without intervention as agreed upon in the Treaty of Hittikel in Year 1. It shows even distribution across all colors and shades. In the next slide, we will see the dispersal in grayscale, which is more indicative of evil versus good across the human population as a whole." The projected screen showed a flickering gray animation that resembled the aurora borealis, shifting from somewhat light to somewhat gray to somewhat dark, but never one shade dominating for any length of time. My pastries were gone now, and I was getting bored. I glanced across the table at Nina. In the shadows, you could see glowing red cracks in her controlled exterior and the magma underneath. S&G shifted in its chair and loudly expelled a cloud of sulfur from its nether regions. Ira droned on. "And now we come to the past 10 years slowed down for easy viewing and directed specifically at the metro area," he said. There was a blinding white light. I shaded my eyes against the glare from the screen. "This is the problem," said Ira, now a short, squat silhouette in front of the screen. "That is not natural." "Is this adjusted for color or still grayscale?" I asked. "Grayscale. If you would pay attention and listen, Crow, you would know that," growled Ira. Pride hates being interrupted or questioned. He changed the slide, and an array of pastels flickered across the screen. "This is the current human spectrum. Notice how the colors are washed out and faded? We don't give a shit about the colors, Crow. Just the shades. But I know you have a soft spot for watching the pretty colors flicker in humans. And I know you've seen examples of this aberration yourself, even though you have been spending your days recently drowning your sorrows all by your little lonesome." I shrugged. The lack of color did concern me, but I wasn't going to let him know that. He continued. "We've been tracking these changes to their point of origin." Big letters flew across the screen in an annoying animation and displayed a date. "Do you remember what happened a week before this date, Crow?" "Nope." "I thought so. You've really let yourself go there, Judge. So disorganized. If you were my employee, I would have your head." He looked down his nose at me, eyes bulging, sparks flew from his ears. "Out of all of them, Pride was the one that I hated the most. Since it had merged with Wrath in the last reorganization, it was just ugly and annoying. I had personal experience with divine wrath. My job was to be a vessel for that kind of shit when it was necessary. It comes with the executioner part of the job. But this kind of wrath, combined with pride, it was insufferable. I did my best to ignore his insults. He wouldn't step over the line. Legally, I was separate from any authority set up by heaven or hell. Ultimately, I was the one who had the final say in my jurisdiction. The only thing he could do was insult me. Sticks and stones. I poured my coffee into my mug. He moved on to the next slide, showing a screenshot of my agenda for that week. Really, Ira, said Leo, you hacked a fucking judge's calendar? You got balls of iron. I'm surprised your pants are long enough to cover what you got hanging there. Nina leaned across the table towards me. For the record, I knew nothing of this. Duly noted, I said, sitting a little straighter in my chair. Ira was taking a pretty big risk. This was beyond just insulting. My records are sacrosanct. Ira, I will be reporting this to your superiors, and I will be advising serious disciplinary action. If you'd been doing your job, Crow, I never would have had to felt the need to access your personal records, said Ira. You, of all people, should have seen this first and addressed it. That you didn't just shows how badly you are at performing your own job. Get on with it, Ira, I said. I'm sure somewhere in this presentation you will get to something interesting, but right now you're just pissing me the fuck off. Your calendar shows you met with a new angel assigned to the area named Jaziel. You remember him? By Ira's tone, I knew he expected me to have forgotten. Nope, not a bit. I did remember. But with a demon of pride, it was always best to play dumb. Pride was the sin that predated humans. It was the original sin. It was the sin that caused Lucifer's fall. Pride, ego. That's what made him asshole numero uno, the first and foremost of the legions of hell. Pride was the sin that turned angels into demons. Jaziel works for Michael as a guardian. He advanced to the next slide, a picture of Michael the Archangel with his fiery sword taken from a Catholic prayer card, and it looked nothing like him. Someone had photoshopped an erect phallus over his sword, which he was holding at his groin, ready to kill the dragon at his feet. Nice. Nina giggled. Ira advanced to the next slide, showing the hierarchy under Michael. Jaziel was a foot soldier, a private, a nobody in a countless army of angels. Ira continued. He's a cocky little shit. This is his first solo mission, and I'm sure he is out to prove something. I almost commented on the irony that a demon of pride was calling someone else cocky, but I refrained. You met him at Harvey's. I'm sure you remember the meal at least, Crow. He went from there to meet a certain preacher named Jeremiah Anderson. Ira clicked the remote and advanced the slide. Jeremiah's face swooped its way across the screen in yet another annoying animated transition. I was starting to feel pretty uncomfortable now. I started thinking about Amanda, about her fading fire. I remembered all the colors returning to the fellowship after Jeremiah had excused himself. I remember her palpable hatred of me on campus, her accusations of demonic possession. I took a deep breath. Ira was right. I had been slipping. And then Amanda's face replaced Jeremiah's. I gripped the arm of the chair a little harder. Nina got up and walked behind me. I could feel her molten lava heat and smell the smoke from the leather where her hands touched the chair behind me. She leaned forward, and I could feel her hot breath on my ear. You remember Amanda, don't you, Crow? She whispered. She was your friend, wasn't she? But you just walked away and left her there with him. A friend wouldn't do that, would they? I could feel the jealousy she fed off of rising inside of me, and I knew she could feel it too. Get the fuck off me, bitch! I am not one of your Johns, I growled. Iris started up again. We believe this is not a random coincidence that Jazil's arrival and meeting with Jeremiah Anderson preceded the shifts in human spectrum we are now seeing. We believe this is sufficient evidence to support the need for an investigation on your part. That is, if you can get off your lazy ass for long enough to do so. He turned the lights back on. The sulfur smell from S&G and the smell of burning leather still lingered in the air. I'll look into it, I said, pushing my chair back from the table. Consider it an inquiry. At this stage, I will not file it as a formal complaint, seeing that there is only circumstantial evidence at this point. Leopold got up from his chair. I'll see you out. He walked with me out the door and down the hall. Sorry about Ira. He's old school, thinks he knows everything, and he doesn't see any point in being respectful. I hope you understand that the rest of us had nothing to do with that ugly security breach. Of course, Leo. You will mention that in your report, right? Yeah, I'll put it in the report. He escorted me back through the offices and through the casino floor, past the cinder ladies on the slot machines and out the front door. I knew this wasn't a gesture of respect or hospitality. He was just making sure I didn't look too closely at the help until I was safely in the limo and headed back to where I belonged. Z and the limo were waiting for me. I can see myself home, Leo. No need to scare the cats any more than you already have. Good luck, Crow. I hope you find something, said Leo, putting out his hand. I shook it. It was scaly and warm, like a lizard that had been sunning itself. In sunlight, it was easy to forget what the demons actually were. I wiped my hand on my coat and set off on my own, walking across the parking lot in the midwinter sun. I kept walking until I reached the edge of the river. Then I broke apart, each bit of my consciousness a blackbird, my thoughts becoming swirling flocks. I could see more this way, and there was much to see. These demons were right. The city was changing. Kansas City was blanketed in white, even beyond the snow that remained from our last snowfall. Its soul was whitening. Not white as in color, but as an absence of color, bright, pulsating, brighter in some places, fading in others. I could see it most in the parts of town that were usually darkened with human sadness, the places where poverty, ignorance, and violence took its toll. These areas had the least color, and I could see the places the whiteness came from. One of my eyes came to roost on a windowsill in the center of town, in a warehouse turned makeshift church. Inside, the light was nearly blinding, just as it had in that PowerPoint presentation from hell. I adjusted my sight to the mortal variety and gathered my flock, swirling around the building and coming to rest in the eaves. Inside, a multitude of people had gathered. They were seated in folding chairs, perfectly aligned across the room in front of a raised platform. Every chair was full, and people stood in the aisle. On the platform was a band of young people playing guitar, keyboard, bass, and drums. A young woman and a young man were singing repetitive lyrics that were displayed on the projection screen above the stage. The crowd sang along with them. Many young people had gathered in front of the platform, and they were swaying in time with the music, many with their hands up in the air. We are one, Lord, let us serve you. We bow down, Lord, we give you our will. It repeated over and over again. The soul colors paled and brightened a little more with each repetition. And then he came out from behind the curtain backdrop, and the crowd screamed his adulation with one voice. Jeremiah. Standing there in front of them, the crowd's energies pouring into him, the light building and becoming even brighter. He held a dog-eared Bible in one hand, the other raised above him, pointing heavenward. I feel the power of God in this holy place, in my holy people. The crowd responded with even more cheering. Some of the people in the front collapsed and were caught by their friends. See the power of the Holy Spirit at work in this place. These people, slain in the Spirit, giving themselves up to the ecstasy that is being one with the Lord. More screaming and a flash of blue-violet from the back. I turned my attention to it. Amanda, standing still in the crowd, glorious, neon blue fire surrounding her, flashing in her eyes now. My Amanda's soul fire, burning bright for all to see. It flared up momentarily, almost defiantly, and then dimmed and smoldered, a violet spark in a colorless ocean of light. Jeremiah held up both hands and the roar stopped. I feel something in my heart of hearts. There are people here who are in need of deliverance. A darkness sits upon this place, desiring a way in, desiring to sow discord and chaos in our midst. Some are here who still struggle with old demons. Come forward and be delivered, he commanded. Accept the light of God into your hearts. Let the old be made new. Some struggled to the front of the room, where they stood before the preacher like sacrificial animals, wide-eyed and confused. He came to the first one, a woman in her 40s, and laid his hand upon her. I can feel the sickness in your mind, the jealousies and the lusts that are on you, how you used to sell your body, your purity, and your honor sold for filthy lucre. The woman sank to her knees in front of him, sobbing. He placed the Bible on her head, and she began mumbling incoherently. I free you from the bonds of sin. Go and sin no more. The woman collapsed, but waiting men caught her, put her pillow under her head and a blanket over her while she shook uncontrollably. I could see the remaining red and deep burnt orange of her soul flame leach out into the floor to be replaced by the bright white light of the rest of the congregation. He called them up by their shortcomings, their failures, their lusts, their deepest traumas. They came up to the altar and he exposed them, laying their pasts and sins open and naked for all to see. It seemed like he could sense the colors in their souls flare up, just as I could. And those were the ones he called forward to rip open. Then he saw the blue fire that had been smoldering at the back of the crowd. There is one among you that has still not accepted Jesus into her heart. I can hear the Holy Spirit within me calling for her, one who has been with me from the beginning, one who still resides in unbelief, wallowing in darkness. Come, Amanda, and be cleansed. Come and leave the darkness behind you in the light of Christ. Be who you were called to be before the foundations of the earth. Let go of the sins of the devil. Flee them, and I will make you clean and pure once again. Amanda took a step forward, lurching, still holding part of herself back. But her color was fading, and the crowd cheered on. Come, I see the darkness hidden inside of you, the thoughts of suicide, the demons of depression brought in by your doubt. Come to me and be cleansed of your fear. She was at the platform now, tears running down her face. Her soul was almost colorless, and there was something else about her, different from the others that had also been healed at Jeremiah's feet. her shadow. In all the light, even in all the light coming from all around her, her shadow was dark. So dark, it was almost solid. It absorbed the colors as she shed them, and it grew even more palpable, taking form before my eyes, a physical mass of the sadness and guilt she felt. This was very different from the other deliverances I had witnessed that night. This was sentient darkness, thought form, tulpa.